So here's a brief intro on how to enter data in the calculator and then how to get the calculator to do a histogram for us. So we're going to try to enter that Dodger home run data that we were talking about in class. And here's the calculator. First thing we do is press Stat button and then enter. And that brings up something that's called the list editor. And you should see here a list 1 through list 6. Hopefully your lists are starting off as empty. My first two lists have something in them. So to clear the data from a list, you arrow up to where the name or the title of the list is, and then you press the clear button, and then you hit enter. I'm going to do the same thing on list 2. I arrow over to list 2. I arrow up to the top or the name of list 2. I hit clear and I hit enter. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to list 1 and I'm going to enter that Dodger home run data. Okay, I'm just going to scroll back through the list to make sure I got no typos. Okay, so a number of things that we do on the calculator require us to put the data first in a list. Now that that data is in the list, we can do a variety of graphs, or as the calculator refers to them, plots or stat plots. You see the word in blue right here, stat plot, above the y equals button. So to get to that menu, we press second and then y equals. That's the stat plot menu. We're going to select, usually they should all say the word off next to them. We're going to hit enter to select plot 1. We're going to hit enter to turn it on. And we're going to go down to where it says type. And we're going to arrow over to the picture that looks like a histogram and hit enter. Then we're going to arrow down to where it says X list. By default, it's expecting the X's, the values to be in list 1. If you wanted to change that to list 2, then you would hit second and the number 2. Notice the little L2 there above the number 2. So, but by default, it will say list 1. So I'm going to do second and the number 1. And most of the time for a histogram, we leave the frequency set at 1. There'll be some situations where we don't want to do that, but we'll talk about that later. Now, if I just hit graph, we're likely not to see much of anything. That looks a little bit goofy, and I've got a graph there from some other class. So let me hit y equals and get rid of that graph. And then we usually want the calculator to zoom in on our data. And the way to do that is to press the zoom button and select option 9, which is zoom stat. So there's a histogram. Now, you'll notice that that histogram does not look exactly like the histogram that we had in the notes. And that's because when you press zoom 9, you're leaving it up to the calculator to decide where the first class should start and how wide the classes should be. So, but we can override that setting on the calculator. If you press the window button, X minimum will be the beginning of the first class. So if we want to make this match what's in the notes, the beginning of the first class should be at 0. And then the end of the last class is at 50. And our classes have a width of 10, so we'll put that in there for X scale. And then for Y minimum, we can't have a frequency less than 0, so we'll put Y min at 0, and we'll put Y max at 10, even though I think our biggest frequency is 8. And for Y scale, we will put 1. So that'll give us a little tick mark every 1 unit on the Y-axis. And now we're not going to press zoom stat, we're just going to press graph. And now that should look identical to this graph that we have in our notes. And if we press the trace button, we will see a definition for each class, similar to the definitions that we had over here in the table. The first class goes from 0 to less than 10, and n equals 8, meaning the frequency in that class is 8. And then if we arrow over there, the next class goes from 10 to 20, but less than 20, and there's 7 in that class. So this is the same information that we have over here from our class frequency table and from our histogram. And then remember in the notes, we changed this to starting at 1 with a width of 12. So we went from 1 to 49. So we can easily match that setup over here. Press the window button and make minimum x minimum 1 and x maximum 49 and x scale of 12, because our classes over here have a width of 12 now. And then I think I need y max to go up to 12 because we had a frequency over here that was 11. And if we press graph now, that should look identical to this histogram that we had in the notes. And once again, if we press the trace button, we'll see that the first class goes from 1 to 13 and has 11 items in it, which is exactly what information we're getting over here off of the histogram. So that's how you do a histogram on the calculator.